So I want to talk about this idea of being a neurotic person. What does that mean? What does it mean to be neurotic, to have this neuroticism trait? So basically, neuroticism is part of this big five personality model, this psychological test that you can take to determine your sort of personality on five different scales and five different factors. Just to summarize, the factors are, what are they? There's openness, which is kind of like a sort of creativity spectrum, sort of how sort of deep your mind thinks, how creative you are, how open you are to new ideas, things like that. And then you've got conscientiousness, which is kind of a spectrum about, I guess, sort of work ethic, duty, responsibility, being conscientious. The next facet is this introversion / extroversion spectrum. So how outgoing are you? How inward are you? How much energy do you get through social experiences or lack of or withdrawal from? And then you've got this agreeable spectrum. So how agreeable or disagreeable are you? Disagreeable people obviously come across more selfish. They're sort of doing their own thing. They have their own ideas, their own opinions, and they're more than happy to voice those most of the time. Agreeable people tend to just go with the flow, and they're quite good sort of peacemakers and good at like teamwork, cooperation, things like that. And then obviously, lastly, you have this neuroticism trait, which I think is basically defined by like a sensitivity to stress. How easy does life stress you out? Things in life. And if you're anything like me, you are easily stressed. I am the relentless neurotic. I'm the relentless neurotic because even though life is difficult, really difficult, especially if you're high on this negative spectrum, we go on regardless because we have to. And I think sometimes it can be quite easy to feel like you're a failure, like life's unfair, that just nothing's going right and you're trying and it's effort and you're not succeeding, and it's easy to just start getting quite depressed about that. And being someone who is high in neuroticism, you're going to be more susceptible to depression, whether it's like a constant low-lying chronic depression or just episodes of full-blown clinical depression where you're not in a good way. So this for me is something I've been dealing with my entire life. So I was always the sensitive kid at school, found it quite difficult to face stresses. The stresses in my time growing up were, the normal things that kids would find stressful, like going to school and, not wanting to do their homework or not liking the dinner that they were served at home and wanting something else to eat. So I ended up developing like a mild eating disorder when I was a kid. Some people would say a fussy eater, as though it's like a choice and I'm kind of just choosing to be picky. But no, there was a lot more deeper issues going on there, like needing like a sense of control and wondering if having certain associations with certain types of foods. It's complicated. I won't go into the eating part of it. But yeah, I would miss a lot of school. I would get ill a lot. I would get poorly. I'd get sick. I'd have time off. And part of it was because, as well as being a neurotic, I think I had issues with like immunity. I had like a bad case of asthma. I was in hospital more during, I think, the first 4 or 5 years of my life than not. So it's pretty severe. So I did have genuine physical ailments to deal with on top of the neuroticism. But I think, if I'm being honest, there were times when I would milk it a little bit and I would say I'm ill and I'm suffering just because I didn't want to go to school, because the stress of school was too much. And I mean, to be fair, when you're stressed, you can get physically ill, whether it's like a sort of placebo self-induced stress where you sort of bullshit yourself into thinking you are ill because you're just stressed and you want to use that as an excuse to get out of something, or the stress genuinely just lowers your immune system, makes you more susceptible to picking up viruses and problems. So, and you know, there was a genuine thing there with illness, whether it was sort of self-inflicted or not, to some degree. And it's hard to know where the lines were there. I think to be honest, it was probably a mostly genuine thing. I was genuinely not very well. I was quite ill, needed time off from school. But yeah, it was probably about 25% of times when I would take time off school and I wasn't poorly, I wasn't ill, and I was just stressed, too stressed to go to school. And this kind of persisted throughout my life. I mean, I had times where I think it was not my first day at school, but must have been about 6 or 7 years old, and I basically beat up the teacher, or at least wrestled with her in an attempt to not to go to school. It was a case of like, you know, mum dropping you off at the school gates, walking away and realising, wait a minute, I don't want to do this. This is stressful. And then the teacher saying, come along, we've got to come in now. It's, you know, it's time for school. She sort of grabbed me by the arm and tried to pull me into school. And I was then resisting, like I didn't want to go to school. I think I don't know if I did this intentionally. I remember sort of stamping on her foot, trying to get away from going to school. I was so resistant and stressed out by this thought of going to school. And it sounds like I'm being a little whiny brat and a bitch at the time. Maybe to some degree I was, but I think I was equally genuinely stressed at this idea of having to do school, because school was difficult. It seemed harder for me than other kids. You know, other kids were just sort of like, I don't know, just looking around aimlessly but without bad intent. And there were a lot of times I feel like I was very just very sensitive, very deep and reflective about my situation, and just thinking like, I'm not happy here and I don't like this and this is uncomfortable. And I couldn't just get on with it like the other kids. But even though I felt like I couldn't, I did, because you kind of have to. You have to go to school. You have to endure life. You know, we're human beings living in the modern age, and we have to do what modern society dictates. You just have to do it. So I did my best. You know, I did school, and I was even though I was a bit of a brat, trying, you know, on my first or second day, whenever it was, of going to school, I did eventually try to do well. There was expectation on me to do well at school, and I did okay. I was probably, you know, in the top 25% of kids at school. You know, I was better than average academically, and that was despite, like I say, a lot of time off. My attendance rate at school was probably like 75%. Not good, but yeah, I did it. I did it to the best of my ability, regardless. And I guess when that's the case, when you do achieve stuff, knowing that, you know, when you reflect and you think, oh, I actually had quite a hard time at school. I was quite stressed and I found it quite difficult. But somehow I still got a good grade, or somehow I still kept going, or I still did it anyway. Like, you can feel quite proud of that. I think that takes a lot of balls and a lot of courage and a lot of determination. And that's really what this video is about. It's just acknowledging that, you know, if you're someone who deals with a lot of stress sensitivity, whether you're high on the Neuroticism scale, yeah, that can have a lot of downsides. But when you then overcome problems, you know, you might have overcome the same problems someone else overcome, but because you had this extra barrier, I think you could take a lot of satisfaction, sort of pride and sense of achievement from having done that over the other person who didn't also have all the angst and worries that went with it. But there were certainly times at school where, because I was trying to do good at school, you know, I was trying to sort of maybe impress my parents and, you know, trying to be a good boy, basically. That did lead to like a little bit of like superficial bullying, where, you know, kids would try and take the piss and sort of tease and sort of single you out a little bit. And as a kid, you don't really want that. So I found it quite difficult at school, trying to walk the line between trying to not pretend I was dumb, but like knowing in my home life I needed to achieve, but knowing at school life, if I overachieved, the kids would come after me. It was just a conflict, an irreconcilable conflict that I couldn't get past. And because of that conflict in my mind where there was no way to win, I would get stressed out of that a lot. And that's another thing, like, I know now, and I knew then, that I was always very susceptible to getting upset and stressed and angry and frustrated. And whereas I don't think, well, it wasn't an issue for like my other sibling, but it was certainly an issue for me. And I remember just coming home from school certain times, and I was not happy, but I didn't want to burden anyone, because I kind of knew at this point, like, okay, this is my issue. No one else is dealing with this kind of level of stress from the day as I am. So I would just maybe lock myself in a toilet or something so no one could see me, and then I would just cry for an hour. And I remember doing that like several times through my sort of teen years, sort of coming home from school, which is weird because, like, this is another thing, like, I grew up in a household where the idea, certainly from my dad, was like, you know, you don't complain, you don't whinge, you get on with things, you man up, you don't cry. So in public or in front of, you know, parents and things, at school, I never cried. You know, I mean, I could be being bullied. I could have been playing football in the school playground area during the break times and fallen over and, you know, smashed my nose in and had a bloody nose or something. Any other kid would cry. They did, and I wouldn't, because you don't cry. So I always grew up with this weird thing whereby in public, quite cold and emotionless, and then behind closed doors, literally sobbing for an hour continuously. When I think about it, it's a bit messed up. But yeah, I kind of feel like that was just part of what I needed to do. I needed to grow up because, you know, no one else. Well, firstly, it was bad to cry, especially being a guy, a boy, a man, going on to being a man. It was bad to show weakness. I think as well, I had this, something I think I potentially get from neuroticism is like a sense of perfectionism. So I'm worried about doing it wrong and feeling like I'm not good enough or that I'm a failure. I got to be good enough. I got to be a good person, and to be a good person, that isn't someone who breaks down and cries all the time. So I just never would. But obviously, behind closed doors, I was shedding a few tears, having a few cries, and I think generally, school and life growing up wasn't all bad, but there was a lot of times that were difficult, and once you get into adulthood, it doesn't get any easier, because then basically it's the same shit, but you have even less sympathy, because it's like, well, now you're an adult, you should be taking on even more responsibility, and you should be functioning in the world at an even higher level. So without going into too much detail, going from being a kid to being an adult was difficult. And then being an adult with this sort of level of neuroticism, this susceptibility to stress, not an easy thing to contend with. And despite that, you know, I've carried on regardless. Like, I had some issues growing up where, you know, I thought I was a failure. I remember this was sort of later in my school life, about 16, 17 years old. I had some friends at school, and we were just going around with our little friendship group. There was another little couple of guys from another friendship group, sort of all having a discussion, and we were going around saying, who do you think is the most unlikely person to ever get married or ever have a girlfriend? And basically my name came up. It's like, you're never going to get a girlfriend, Ben. Sorry about that. And I was like, oh, okay. I sort of like laughing at the time, but I was thinking, firstly, I thought that was a bit unfair, because I thought, you know, that even though I do have this stress sensitivity, I'm not stupid And yeah, I'm not the most charming or attractive guy in the world, but it's like, okay, I think I might do okay. But yeah, everyone just seemed to think that I was a fucking loser within my sort of group, or maybe not everyone, but certainly the people from the other group who sort of pointed the finger at me, and everyone sort of agreed, sort of thought that. So I was sort of in my late teens. I think I was about 18. I ended up having an online relationship with this girl that I found on the internet. It was a bit of a distance relationship. We ended up meeting up a few times, spending like weeks together. It went on for about 6 or 7 months, maybe. And then it ended. And it needed to end because it was a shit relationship. Like, she was not a very good girl. I don't want to sound like I'm slagging this person off behind her back or whatever. I'm not going to say names, but yeah, she was. She had her own sets of issues, and obviously, I knew I had issues. I knew that I had to aim low, and so I did. But yeah, I ended up basically going out with someone who was a bit sort of psychopathic, I think, and it didn't work well with someone like me who was quite susceptible to stresses and stuff. And it was very difficult. We ended up breaking up, and it needed to break up because, on reflection, it was actually a shit relationship. Like, it was good that I had, I kind of did it to sort of prove to myself that I could get a girlfriend, unlike, what my peers at school were telling me at the time. So I proved them wrong. Ended up being the first out of all of us to end up getting a girlfriend. But yeah, it was a seriously toxic relationship, and I was treated really, really quite badly. And another friend of mine at the time who I spoke to about this person said, I think you need to get out of this because she's the sort of girl who, if she doesn't get her way, she's going to drop you in it and make false claims about things that aren't true and potentially ruin your life. So yeah, she was like that. She was the sort of person that, if she was having a bad day and you didn't buy her a gift, she'd sort of threaten to, tell the police you've raped her or something like that. It's that kind of psychopath type thing we're talking about. But yeah, it ended in the end. Yeah, and I was, because it was my first relationship, because I stupidly at the time thought that I was a loser and I couldn't do better, even though it was a bad relationship, I got really depressed by it. I got really upset. And that was the first time in my life that I suppose you would say I had like a full-blown mental breakdown, because I was always sensitive as a kid, but like when you break up, it just amplifies everything like 100-fold, especially if it's your first ever breakup. And I went on a big depression bender. It led to some other things, which I ended up getting down. Let's just say that was the trigger point that put me into a depression, whereby I think I was continually crying for about a week solid. I would wake up and cry, and then I would sleep, and then I'd wake up and cry. I'd fantasize about killing myself. And then after about a week, the sort of crying stopped. And then at the time, I'm still obviously living with my parents and going to school, and they called a doctor round. I took some medication. I think that might have taken the edge off of it. But then thereafter, for the next 6 months, maybe a year, I was really, really depressed. Every week, I'd sit down and think, how am I going to kill myself today? I didn't want to die. I was scared of dying. I was scared of killing myself. But the pain was so bad that I just couldn't deal with living, really. And yeah, so I came up with some ideas, and but long story short, I didn't do that. I didn't end it. And to any normal person, they would think, fucking hell, that's a bit of an overreaction. Well, you got depressed for like a year or months and months over a girl, over a breakup, which you yourself admit was shit. Like, what are you talking about? But yeah, I felt it. I felt it so deep that it was every day was a torture. You know, it was like a physical torture. And there's only so many days you can endure that. Know that it's just, or you feel as though it's never going to get better, because it's not getting better. And then you start to think things like that. But what I will say now is it did get better. And it obviously didn't happen overnight, and it took months. And yeah, I got over it. And I continued with life. And since that point, that girlfriend, without wanting to sound like a slut or something, I have ended up dating quite a few girls since then. Yeah, maybe about 50 or so. I've ended up having relationships maybe with about a dozen of them. But relationships which would last anything from like 2 months to 5 years. And I'm now at a point where I'm actually seeing someone who isn't messed up. She's just a really good person. And I tell her that all the time. I tell her, like, you're just so good. And the moral, I guess, of the story is, like, you can be very sensitive to stress and these neurotic tendencies. And, you know, when shit does hit the fan, when you are like that, it can lead to like big, I call them depression benders, just these episodes that can last for, at best, days, typically weeks, sometimes months, even years. And that's really tough, but I'm still here. I'm still being me. I'm still surviving. And it's kind of funny how I was so depressed about this one girl she was a psychopath, yet now I found someone who's normal, and not just normal, but really fucking good. And if I had killed myself back when things were bad in my late teens, I would never know that. I would never know that life could get better. And like right now, I don't have all the answers. I am still neurotic. I still have problems with stress, and I'm still sensitive to stress. And however, I think it's easy when you're going through bad times to start thinking some dark thoughts, and it consumes you. If you can get through it, even if it's just time, you know, like, because at first you can't do anything. Like, if you're really depressed, you can't get out of bed. But as long as you don't end it all, then there's a chance it could turn around. And certainly, so far as on the relationship level, it completely has turned around. Like, like, yeah, my girlfriend now, she's like so much, like, compared to my first, she's like so much more well put together. Like, she's in control of her emotions. She's hotter, you know, like, on every facet, she's just a better person. I can't think, yeah, if I was to break it down into like 10 aspects, there's not a single one that's worse that I had with the previous one that I was so distraught about. Now, this begs the question, what would happen if her and I break up? Well, over the years of being an adult, I spent a lot of time working on myself and coming up with strategies to minimize the neuroticism. And I've talked a little bit about that, and I'll hopefully continue to talk about that on this channel as I go forward. So I don't actually think it would be as bad, even though the loss would actually be a lot worse. But yeah, the point is, like, if you're someone that suffers with depression because you're someone who's too neurotic, you're constantly worrying, you end up just going in those dark places. Like, if it's the first time it's happened to you, don't lose your shit and just end your life over it. Even if you're having like 6 months of just, I don't know, like I can imagine being like when I was a kid and you'd get a bit of bullying or whatever, and I can imagine I can imagine for other people it being a lot worse than it ever was for me, and the temptation to just end it would feel so great. But life does move on, things do change in small ways, even if it takes years, and then eventually things might not get perfect, but they get better. And sometimes you can just, you have good days and you have bad days. There's days where I wake up and, I'm kind of, I have a bit of motivation. I'm willing to do things, and other days where it's like, I feel like shit. And, if you're someone who feels like that, just know that things aren't permanent, and there's actually ways to overcome that. And I think really being neurotic, being someone who's susceptible to anxieties and depressions, things like that, overthinks things, maybe too perfectionist, all the rest of it, it can be difficult to deal with. But then you've got to at least be honest with yourself and take credit that you're dealing with it. Everyone else in the world, they'll tell you that life is tough, that they've got their own problems. They might not even ever want to hear your problems, because like, look, I got my own problems. I got financial issues. I've got issues with my kids. I've got my boss being an absolute cunt towards me or something. And it's like, yeah, you've got issues. I've got issues. Yeah, we all have problems, but you've got this extra issue that no one can see, because it's not like a physical disability. It's kind of all in your mind, I guess, or your body as well. And you have to deal with that. And I think you need to be the one to go away and give yourself credit for overcoming the difficulties that go along with being a neurotic person, because no one else is going to do it, because no one else knows what it's like. I mentioned my girlfriend earlier. She's very understanding as a person, but she doesn't have depression. She's not super high on the neuroticism scale. She's up there, she's in the top maybe 25, 30 percentile, but she's not like me in the like 98th percentile. So she'll never quite know what it's like to have the sort of responses to life as I do. Yeah, you just got to give yourself credit, because even though other people can kind of understand it, or understand it like intellectually, they'll never know what it's like. And you're going to have to negotiate life with this kind of hidden disability that no one kind of knows about or will even acknowledge, at least not now. Just a quick thing to add, like, I think society's come a long way, certainly in the UK, probably a lot of other Western countries in general, whereby the depression stigma, the admitting that you're having mental health issues, isn't quite there anymore. People talk about their mental health problems more, and people are being honest about it, and that's good. But I don't know, it's a weird thing where there is a bit more of an allowance, which is good, and I'm glad that the goalposts have changed and it's not quite where it was. But at least for me, I still feel like ultimately, people don't really give a shit. People don't give a shit if you've got issues. So you're going to have to really, no one's going to help you. You're going to have to be someone who's going to have to find ways to sort of navigate the world, given the shortcomings or given the mental health issues. But at the same time, yeah, it's not as bad as it was. So anyway, I think I'll just leave that there. I just want to, yeah, congratulate you if you are dealing with problems, and especially if you're someone who has always dealt with problems. You know, you've always been high on the neuroticism scale. And yeah, be proud of yourself for how far you've come and the fact that you're still here. Because if you're anything like me and you've had these difficulties and, you know, you've overcome them, I think that's something to sort of reflect upon and give yourself some credit for. So that's all I've got to say in this video. Hope to see you again in a future video. Thanks.